Who was Aristotle. Whenever the word polymath is used, which is not often, one always thinks of Aristotle. Born in the year 384 B.C.E. in the small village of Stagira in the Macedonian region of northeastern Greece, the 55 miles of Thessaloniki, Aristotle would challenge everything that was known about the ancient world. Nothing was sacred to him or outside the purview of questioning and examination. His writings are among the most diverse and profound in ancient history. He wrote on physics, empirical biology, zoology, metaphysics, logic, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, psychology, linguistics, economic, political theory, and government, among many others. If analyzed as a philosopher alone, he ranks among the best, and only Socrates and Plato might actually surpass his influence. I'm Generalized, and this is Historicity, a channel in which we keep a record of the constant call time, the good and the bad, in hopes of learning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. His early years are a blur. What is known is that his father, Nicomachus, was the personal physician of King Amyntas III of Macedon, the founder of the unified Macedonian state and father of Philip II of Macedon, a man who would make of Macedon an empire. Both his parents died when he was about 13 years old, possibly as a result of an Illyrian invasion that took place after the king's death in 371 BCE. At that age, he became the responsibility of Proxenus of Adarneus, possibly an uncle of his, who became his guardian and probably raised him in frequent contact with the Macedonian palace and the royal family, a connection which would prove to be useful later on in life. At the age of 17, Aristotle moved to Athens to continue his education at one of the most influential and prestigious institutions in the Greek world at the time, Plato's Academy. There, he would remain forging relationships, examining thought, challenging himself, and learning from his master and his peers alike for 20 years until Plato's death in 347 BCE. Disappointed with the new changes and the direction the Academy was headed, after Plato's last breath, he decided to move to Adarneus, a Greek city in the region of Aeolus in Asia Minor, at the age of 37, with his friend Xenocrates. And both became guests of Hermias of Adarneus, the ruler there, and a former alum of the Academy himself. It must be highlighted that based on the fact that his guardian, after his father's death, was himself from Adarneus, it's quite possible that one of the branches of his extended family might have originated there. Additionally, several sources have him there acting as a sort of Macedonian ambassador, something which can't be disputed based on both his closeness to the Macedonian royal family and his possible familial ties to the land of Adarneus. He would remain there for 4 years until Hermias' capture, while defending his city from the expansionist desires of Artaxerxes III and his great Persian Empire. Upon the removal of his patron as the ruler of Adarneus, Aristotle then fled to the island of Lesbos across the coast with his pupil and ex-Academy alum Theophrastus. And there he began examining the marine biology in the region. This is the time period of political upheaval, a time period in which he had to flee a city to save his life, marked by the death of his friends and the constant threat of the Persian Empire upon Greece. And the fact that he continues laboring on his works speaks volumes of his level of focus, dedication, and concentration. Not much later, he was also met there by someone he had met in Hermias' court. Her name was Pythias, Hermias' niece or daughter, depending on the source. while in Lesbos they would marry and bring to the world a daughter named Pythias herself, after her mother. Aristotle and Pythias would remain in Lesbos for 2 more years. For in 343 BCE, Aristotle was summoned by King Philip II of Macedon, someone he had probably been raised with before his departure to the academy, and with whom he had probably stayed in touch throughout the years. Now, Philip invited him to return back to the land of his birth to tutor his 13-year-old son, Alexander, a man who would grow up to earn the title of Alexander the Great. In Hellas, the capital city of Macedon, Aristotle was appointed the head of the Royal Academy. And in Nysa, he lectured not only Alexander, but 2 future kings, Ptolemy, who would eventually rule over Egypt and would found the Ptolemaic dynasty that ended with Cleopatra, and Cassander, who would eventually rule over Macedon and the rest of Greece from 305 BCE until his death in 297 BCE. His association with Alexander, the most revered of his pupil though, is sometimes the stuff of legends. Historians cannot agree on whether their relationship lasted only 8 years or just 2. But what is known, based on Aristotle's own opinions in relation to the theme of Persia, is that his animosity and influence might have bled into the thinking of the young boy and might have fueled his desire to conquer the Persian Empire. According to Peter Green, a historical biographer, indeed his attitude, Aristotle's, toward Persia was uncompromisingly ethnocentric. He believed slavery to be a natural institution, and equally that all barbarians, non-Greeks, were slaves by nature. It was therefore right and fitting for Greeks to rule over barbarians, but not for barbarians to rule over Greeks. He further counsels Alexander to be a leader to the Greeks and a despot to the barbarians, to look after the former as his friends and relatives, and to deal with the latter as with beasts or plants. Although these words are inexcusable, it must be pointed out in defense of the philosopher that these heinous words and opinions were formed in a time in which Greece had been in constant warfare with the Persian Empire, the barbarians, and his friends and some family members as well, as in the case of Hermias of Adarneus, had just been murdered by the Persian king Artaxerxes III. But the extent of his influence is also debatable because of the approach Alexander took to conquest. Rather than listening to his teacher's xenophobic words and guidance, he accepted those conquered as equal, even going as far as marrying Roxana, Stagira II, and Parysatis, all princesses of Persia, and by all counts, daughters of the great kings of antiquity. Whether defensible or not, as Green points out, there were several reasons for Aristotle's sentiments toward Persia. As mentioned before, in 341 BCE, the secret dealings between Hermias of Adarneus, Aristotle's father-in-law, it must be pointed out, and Artaxerxes III, king of Persia, became known. It was revealed that Hermias had been blindsided by someone whom he thought was a friend, mentor of Rhodes, and who turned out to be a mercenary working for the Persians, that upon meeting him, chained him up and sent him to Susa to be tortured and interrogated in the hopes he would divulge the secret attack plans of King Philip II of Macedon. It is said that Hermias' last words were, "Tell my friends that I have done nothing shameful or unworthy of philosophy," which incredibly shows the influence that Aristotle and his friendship exercised in his life, as well as the influence of his studies at the academy. For even after being tortured to divulge their secrets, remember, Aristotle is quite possibly a kind of emissary, a kind of ambassador from King Philip II and for Macedon. Hermias basically utters in his moment of death, "Tell my friends that I have done nothing, that I haven't betrayed them." Had it not been for Hermias' secrecy and loyalty, the future of Greece and the ancient world might have turned out incredibly different, for the great triumphs of Alexander the Great might have never actually taken place. When looking at the influence of Alexander and Aristotle and Alexander, it must be pointed out that at the age of 15, he had already been placed in charge of his father's armies. That is, just 2 years after being under the tutelage of the great philosopher. Little is known about Aristotle's following 5 years after Alexander left him in 340 BCE. But what is known is that in 335 BCE, he moved again to Athens. There, he set up his own school in a public exercise area or gymnasium dedicated to the god Apollo Lykios, which later would only be known by the name of the Lyceum. There, his pupils would conduct research into all his areas of interest: logic, music, mathematics, botany, biology, astronomy, medicine, cosmology, physics, philosophy, psychology, metaphysics, ethics, theology, rhetoric, political history, government, political theory, and the arts. While teaching there, he also managed to amass one of the greatest collections of old manuscripts on these subjects of study, and assembled in doing so the first great library in Western antiquity, predating even the great library of Alexandria, which might itself have come to reality because of his influence, since, as we stated earlier, Ptolemy, who would eventually build it, had been one of Aristotle's pupils. Sadly, during this time period, his wife Pythias passed away, but he soon developed a relationship with Harpyles of Stagira, a lady who sometimes is referred to as a slave and other times as his second wife, but who would bear him a son, Nicomachus, named after his own father. During this time period, he also focused primarily on his writing, completing an estimated 200 works during his lifetime. Out of his extensive bibliography, there are 5 key works that allow us some insight into the genius provided by Aristotle. They are the Nicomachean Ethics, Metaphysics, Politics, Poetics, and the Anima, or on the soul. In the Nicomachean Ethics, which is named after his son, Nicomachus, he explores the nature of happiness, which he calls eudaimonia, or living well, and he presents as the principal goal of life. To achieve it, he examines how man should best live life and the virtues which produce happiness. He did not believe it could be achieved by accumulating material things, wealth, and fame. Instead, he came to the conclusion that happiness is an internal and private state of mind that can be achieved by fulfilling your own potential. In Metaphysics, or first philosophy, he tries to examine the cause and the principle of things. He states, all men suppose what is called wisdom to deal with the first causes and the principles of things. Aristotle distinguished between things that are better known to us and things that are better known in themselves, and maintained that we should begin our study of a given topic with things better known to us and arrive ultimately at an understanding of things better known in themselves. Politics describes the polis, or city-state, as the natural habitat of human beings, and describes man as a political animal. In it, he also describes the role that politics as a study and the political community must play in bringing about the virtuous life in the citizenry. He studies the task statesmen must master in order for them to create lasting constitutions, enduring laws, customs, and political structures. In other words, he presents political science as a craft that can be analyzed, studied, and dissected. Aristotle's Poetics is, by all accounts, the oldest surviving work of literary criticism. In it, he examines the works of Sophocles and Euripides and creates a theory based on his observation on how to create drama. Lastly, on the anima, or on the soul, he examines and tries to understand the soul and its essence and the natural properties using his understanding of biology, as well as scientific thought and logic. This work, as opposed to what its theme and topic might indicate to us, a Judeo-Christian society, does not focus on the spiritual but more on the psychological, and doesn't focus on the human soul alone either, but on something much broader. For Aristotle, anything that is alive, in other words, anything that is moving and changing, can be constituted as something possessing a soul. He stayed 13 years in Athens until in 323 BCE, after Alexander's death, a new wave of anti-Macedonian sentiments rekindled within the city-state. A man by the name of Demophilus and another by the name of Eurymedon of Hierophant levied charges of impiety against the philosopher, who, fearing for his life, decided to flee Athens one last time and left for Chalcis, an island off the coast of Attica. In his parting words, it is stated he said, "I will not allow Athenians to sin twice against philosophy," a clear reference to the death of his predecessor, Socrates, at the hands of the unruly masses. He would only spend less than a year in Chalcis, for in the year 322 BCE, Aristotle, the first teacher, Aristotle, the most formidable and prolific writer of antiquity, would pass away of natural causes. He was 62 years old. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell so that every time that there's a new video, you can be immediately informed. Also, come on, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm General Elias, and this is history.